YouTube, welcome back. My name's Viti. Welcome to the channel. And today we're going to be doing a front crank seal and harmonic balancer on my CRV. You were the chosen one. You have never broken. You don't give me any issues, and you're also the cheapest car out of the fleet. I don't know why you decided you wanted to start leaking now, but we're going to get you taken care of. This thing, oh, I don't care what nobody says. I love this car, no matter how much it's junk. I know you see that mileage, 313, still runs like a champ. We have the CRV set up on the lift now. What I'm going to begin with is first, I have to loosen the serpentine belt. In order to do that, I'm going to use an actual belt tool just because it's a little tight area in there to get the belt loose and pull it off the alternator pulley. You do have to pull the power steering fluid reservoir out of the way and just bungee it off to the side like most people do. Once that's off, then I can lower the hood, put the car up in the air, and pull the right front wheel off to get the actual repair started. First step in getting this belt off is just to actually move this power steering reservoir out of the way. So just pry this back. I'm using an actual pry tool, but you can use a flathead screwdriver, anything along those lines, a pry bar. Just pull that back and lift this up. A couple of wiggles and it's free. With the reservoir out of the way, now we have enough clearance to get to the actual belt tensioner right there. To get this belt off, I'm actually going to be using a serpentine belt tool. This is the gear wrench set. Reason why, number one, interchangeable heads, and it makes it easier to get your positioning the best where you have the most leverage. And let's say if your tensioner's here, you can set this upright and then pick your angle on the direction that it fits, and then you can get the most leverage on the tensioner. So I am using a special tool for this. Like always, I'll put any tools required down in the description below. If there is links, there should be one for this kit. I'll link it in the description. I'm going to take my serpentine belt tool. This is a 14mm bolt head on the tensioner. Get it down there. It's a little bit tight with the camera here, but once it's on, pull your tool back and you can get the belt off nice and easy from the belt drive. Now, it's off. I'm going to take the tool out here and our belt is free, ready to start working on the bottom side. Once we get our wheel removed, we're going to have to remove this plastic panel in order to gain plenty of room to work on the crank pulley itself. I took out all the clips here on the passenger front of the plastic under panel. This one bolt over here, the clip doesn't want to come off and I don't want to break it and have a wobbly plastic here. So what I'm going to do is, you don't necessarily have to move this panel. You can actually just bungee it off to the side. So I'm just going to put a bungee here on this plastic part, pull down and tie it off to the back side of the car. Here's a clear indication as to why you were seeing so much wobble earlier in the video on the actual harmonic balancer. Here is the rubber that's supposed to be part of the vibration dampening on this harmonic balancer. Now with the crank seal leaking, I just noticed this recently. It could have been going on for a really long time, but anytime oil hits rubber, it starts to deteriorate and this thing is completely shot. You can get this 19mm bolt head off the crank with a very strong gun and a regular 19mm socket. This here is what's part of the actual toolkit to do this job. It's a 19mm weighted socket. You've seen these online before, or anybody that talks about Hondas probably has one of these. It makes getting this bolt off significantly easier. And then when you go to put it on, obviously you don't want to use this when you're torquing it because you'll over torque it and you could damage the front end of the crank. Throw it on your impact gun, put it on the crank, and real quick, takes that crank bolt right out. Once you have your crank bolt out of the way, grab yourself a rubber mallet, give the actual harmonic balancer a couple taps to loosen it up, being sure not to lose this keyway right here between the crank and the actual harmonic balancer itself. Free it up with the mallet, Now you should be able to wiggle it off like that. With our harmonic balancer out of the way, here is a clear view. Perfect evidence our front crankshaft seal is actually leaking and causing all of this nastiness on the front side of our engine. This here is actually parts of the harmonic balancer that have come off. There's some oil-soaked rubber right there. So we're gonna get this seal pulled out, but before we do that, I wanna clean this area off. That way we're working with a nice clean area and there's no dirt that's going inside the engine. After a bunch of brake clean, and I actually used some good old-fashioned WD-40 as an engine degreaser because I couldn't find any gunk. After spraying it down a bunch of times, hitting it with the brush, with a rag, and then some more brake clean, I was able to get it to a clean enough position where I'm happy with it. And then I also cleaned off a little bit of the subframe here and some of the other stuff. One thing that I do want to recommend is I'm not using the original belt. I'm going to be replacing it. If you are using the belt that you had on the car before you started this, make sure you take it all the way out or put it off to the side. You don't want to get any of that oil or degreaser or brake clean on that belt because it will start to eat away, just like it did for the harmonic balancer. To remove the front crank seal, I'm going to be using an actual seal puller because I have one from working on cars for so long. You can get the job done with a flathead screwdriver if you don't have a seal puller. Just be wary that you don't do any damage to the end of the crankshaft or to the part of the timing case where the seal itself actually rides. So with this seal puller, I can just tuck it in, push against the actual crank gear inside the case, do a little wiggling, make sure we're hooked on to the spring part of the seal. Let's flip this back over on this side. The tool does make it really nice for getting stuff out. And our crank seal is out. We have the original balancer and the crank seal removed from the vehicle right here. You can actually see better now exactly where the seal failed right on the bottom. Do yourself a favor, if you've never done one of these, or that goes for any seal on a car, get yourself a spare one just in case you mess the first one up. Here is the replacement balancer. As you can see, that's what the rubber is supposed to look like. And that's what the rubber did look like. Now, there are a bunch of special tools that you can buy to install these seals. Honda seals are usually pretty forgiving in terms of pushing them in. I am going to use this seal and race driver that I have in stock, but that's just going to get this started, and then I'm going to have to push it the rest of the way in. Now, when you install the seal, you'll see right here that there is a groove on the timing case. Let me see if I can make this a little bit darker. There you go, that's better. So you can see this groove right here on the timing case. You want the edge of the seal to be flush with this lip here on the timing case itself. Another thing too is that whenever I install a seal, regardless of what anybody will tell me, the way I like to do it is I like to put a little bit of grease on the outside of the seal. This right here, this is just a tub of sunroof grease that I always use for everything whenever I'm lubing something. But just put a little bit on the outside of the seal. Spread that around. I can't do that with the camera in my hand, but spread it around, and then we're going to take it over to the car and get it lined up right there on the timing case. Once you have the outside of your seal lubricated pretty well with either a silicone spray or some sort of sunroof lube, something that doesn't really collect dirt, Honda seals are super forgiving. I'm just going to line this up with my hands and push it in. It's not that hard, and like I said, you want the outside of the seal to line up flush with the metal on the timing case. But you can realistically push these in by hand. They do make special seal drivers. I was going to try using my seal and race driver, but the problem is the snout of the crankshaft actually hits the tool. So I won't be able to go further in, but you can push it with your thumbs and get it lined up. That, get the top side in. That side's flush. It's flush all the way around. Putting the harmonic balancer on is pretty simple. Same thing. I always like to take a little bit of the lube, put it on the outside edge here, just because the seal is going to be riding on that. This is not going to hurt the seal or get into the oil and cause any issues, but whenever I use a fresh seal, I don't want any sort of dry surfaces. Here's our keyway for the crank. So take your balancing pulley, get it kind of close. Should be able to push it right on, like so, where it sits flush. Grab your key, line it up with the crank balancer and the crankshaft itself. Right there. Nice and flush. Then thread our bolt back in. I'll do it by hand. Other people are going to run this in with the gun and then torque it, but I'm just going to thread it in by hand, like so. And we're going to torque it. Our next step for the vibration damper here and this crank bolt is we're going to get this bolt torqued. Now, in the kit that I linked below, you got the actual weighted socket for getting the crank bolt off. You'll see here, the socket does not fit in here. You're not supposed to use this socket when it comes to torquing. This is our counter hold tool. This will go in the vibration damper. Once you have your balancer on and your tool installed in the balancer, the idea is to take your 1/2 inch bar, whether it's a ratchet or a breaker bar, and use it at that angle. That way the bar itself will come into contact with the lower control arm, and you can use that as a steady constant as you're torquing the 19mm bolt. The torque spec for this bolt that I found online from what most people are saying is 36 foot-pounds and then an additional 90 degrees. So first, I have it set to 36 foot-pounds, so we're going to bring our torque wrench in. The engine's going to rotate until the 1/2 inch bar touches the control arm right there. So let's do our 36 foot-pounds. Okay, now, next, for the 90-degree portion of torquing this bolt, I am actually going to use the gun. You can call it what you want it, but if you look at your crank pulley here, it has 6 sides. What you can do is we have to go an additional 90 degrees. So I know that if I start here at the top of this point, 90 degrees is going to be right here in the center of this flat on the actual balancer. So how am I going to mark that? Well, very simply. I'm going to put my impact gun on there. I'm going to take my paint marker and just put a line on my socket. So I know that when the socket spins and gets to here on the crank pulley, it's 90 degrees and it's been torqued. My socket right here is marked with this paint mark that I put on the top of the crank balancer, and then 90 degrees would be halfway in the middle of this flat here on the balancer. I apologize for the noise, but I have it going forward. Just double check, I do. We're just gonna go to 90 degrees. A little bit more. There we go. Now that the crank bolt is torqued, I recommend just draping the belt over the crank and over the AC compressor clutch pulley over here. Hopefully your belt didn't move a bunch, or if you're installing a new belt, feed it down through the top before you put the wheel back on and this lower panel. Have it run across the crank, up over the AC pulley, and up right here around the water pump pulley. So mine is draped pretty nice. I'm gonna put this plastic panel back on, lower the car down, and put the belt up on the top. When going to put the belt back on, do yourself a favor. There's 2 10mm bolts right here on this bracket that holds the power steering pump reservoir. Take those bolts out. Be sure not to drop the 10 mil. Take that out, and now you have a lot more clearance in here to work with the belt, because getting it over the tensioner is going to be the hardest part. The best way that I found to do this is you want to have your belt routed around the actual tensioner pulley and up on the front side here of the power steering pulley. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my tool onto the tensioner like that. Hold the belt on the front side here. I'm gonna go around the back so it's easier to see. Put some tension on the tensioner and kind of roll the belt on. Those are the ribs. Now I'm gonna hold it there for a second, get a better grip with my tool. Pull it back one more time. And our belt's on. Now, always double check to make sure your belt is seated in every single pulley. It's hard to tell here on this Honda, but you can shine a light down from the top and double check to make sure your belt is routed on every single one of the pulleys and sitting in the ribs correctly here. We're gonna take our power steering reservoir holding bracket. I'm going to thread these two 10mm bolts in by hand. There's one here on the left, and then one here on the right. Get those in and started. Grab the gun. 1 and 2. That's beautiful. We're going to unhook our power steering reservoir, bring it back over. Line the notches up on the bracket. Okay. It's running. Belt's moving smooth. We just get a light. That smoke is some of the actual oil and the spray from cleaning the bottom of the engine off. Our crank pulley is no longer wobbling. It's a beautiful thing. And that's how I fixed my 2010 Honda CRV. Thanks again for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. If there's anything you had any specific questions about, please feel free to leave it down in the comments. I did put a link to the tools that I use in the description below. Thanks again, and funny story, as I was pulling this car in, guess what happened? Remember how I always say something's always broken? The actual strings to my garage door broke. So the next thing I gotta fix is the garage door so I can get the car out of here. Well, that's for another video. Thanks again.